So apparently, Marrow, the intro played. So apparently, Marrow is do you need a glass of water, Marrow? Is that why you were like flicking your tongue at my camera? Like, are you mimicking your snakes here? Apparently, Marrow wants to lick my audience. Apparently, that is. I know that I've told you that it sounds like you stuck your phone in your mouth, but now I'm not entirely sure. I don't have proof that you didn't.
Everyone, I have a lot of ADHD today, so please ignore me if I do something ridiculous.
So hi guys, welcome to the absolute chaos that is this stream.
Chaos? How dare you accuse me of such heinous violence?
Both of us have ADHD. Expect all of the side tangents. Tangent, that's the word I was trying to remember. It didn't start with a D.
That's it. There you go.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the background on this. So Marrow is getting back into content creation, as you guys know, over on the channel Nervardia. And one of the things she wanted to do is she wanted to kind of edge a little bit away from atheist content. She wants to get more into scientific stuff because she's really enjoyed the recent videos she's done. So she was like, you know what? I really enjoyed that one time that I covered the bubonic plague. Let's go look up a bunch. Yes, you guys can all go watch that. I will put a link in the up in the iCard after the stream goes live and is processed for you guys to go check that one out because I actually helped out with that one too. But she was like, I really enjoyed my coverage of the bubonic plague. So like, let's go look up some other plagues that might be interesting. Akeda, $10 super chat, thank you so much, says I would pay to see that on OnlyFans.
Okay, when I do finally load up the video, you do get to hear some really long sciencey words in an Australian accent. As we all know, that is like the sexiest thing on the internet.
I mean, other than apparently, like, no, it's the hottest thing on the internet, you know, hotter than the fever that you're going to be getting from the disease we'll be talking about. So we started looking at, like, of course, you started Wikipedia to kind of see just like a general list of these sorts of things. And I found one that looked really interesting, which was a plague that happened in the 8th century CE, like at the very beginning of the 8th century CE in Japan. And in less than 2 years, 1/3 of the Japanese population died, which is absolutely baffling. So we started looking into that, and it turned out that plague was smallpox.
Smallpox. Yes,
which
smallpox.
Marrow, you want to talk a little bit about how you reacted to finding out that the plague was smallpox? Because as you guys might know, we actually have supposedly eradicated smallpox due to vaccination. As far as we can tell, it's gone. There might be a possibility if some anti-vax kid like runs into a scab or something of bringing it back, or if something escapes from a lab and there's anti-vax people. But as far as we can tell, it's not endemic in the world population anymore.
Yes, so it has actually officially been eradicated. There are some countries that have like a little bit of smallpox left in the lab, and every year people come together and debate whether they should destroy it. I have my thoughts, but considering we had that outbreak of monkeypox, I am simultaneously more relieved that we had this outbreak of monkeypox and more horrified, because if you are immune to smallpox, you are immune to monkeypox because they're the same family and they work very similar. So if a country was to release smallpox into the world, you know, bioterrorism has always got this massive risk of coming back and biting you in the ass. And
well, there's also the necessity of herd immunity as well. Like, there's kids that like can't have the vaccine.
Yeah. So the idea of spreading bioterrorism of something as ridiculous as smallpox, I'm not overly worried that they're going to do that now. But there's always that fear. So they're actually still researching smallpox vaccines to try and make them smallpox vaccines, so the effects aren't as bad. So they're still doing it, because if smallpox does come back, and you will find out very soon how incredibly horrifying this disease is. But we'll talk about that a bit later to escape the algorithm gods. So
Yeah, because the algorithm doesn't like it when you talk about anything particularly controversial. Though we said the word vaccine, so it might get mad.
yeah.
Talking about the plague, the first report happened on August 12th in 735 CE in Kyushu, which is the southernmost island in Japan. Which, by the way, for those of you who speak Japanese, I'm sorry if I absolutely murder it. I do not speak Japanese. Like, I know how to say "nice to meet you," and that's about it. So I watch a
I
lot
can
of
say
anime.
kudasai. Kudasai is please or thank you, one of those. But before we go too far into the topic, I do need to tell everyone a joke. Trigger warning on the joke. This is a dad level of joke. Okay.
Oh gods.
Yes. Did you
Takeda
hear
will
the
be proud of you.
Yeah, hopefully. This one's for you, Akita. Okay. Did you hear the joke about the guy who headbutted a tree? There was no
What?
punchline. There was no punchline. It was only a face palm.
Oh, that is bad. That is so bad. Also, another $10 super chat from Makeda who said he would pay to hear it on OnlyFans.
Oh, okay. I'll have to start up my OnlyFans right now, and I'll just
Oh,
stand there and just go large endoplasmic reticulum.
Oh, by the way, since you guys did ask the question in the last stream, Maro and I did negotiate things and we decided on a 50-50 split of what Google lets me keep of super chats each month. You guys asked about that. Originally, Maro had said she didn't want to. When we talked it over, it seems like you guys are very much in favor of it. And it's only fair if we're going to be doing it this regularly. So we're doing a 50-50 split of what Google lets me keep because Google takes a chunk of super chats.
Yes.
So if you send a super
It's
chat,
not
we are
fair.
splitting it.
Yeah.
Apparently,
Thank you
the
very
joke is
much.
worth a bonus. Takeda just
Yay!
flooding the thing.
All
right.
I'll also tell you, I told my dad that joke, and I was very proud because I actually made that joke up. That's a Mero original, that joke. And I told that to Dad, and Dad was like, "Ha ha!" And I'm like, "Come on, Dad, that's hilarious. I'm hilarious." And he goes, "Yes, you are an hilarious."
Oh. Ooh.
Burn! I needed to go to the burns unit after that one.
Yeah, you needed some aloe for that.
Yep.
All right, so getting back into it, the first outbreak of smallpox that was reported happened on August 12th in 735 CE in Kyushu, which, as I mentioned, is the southernmost island in Japan. It started when a fisherman came into contact with what they described in the document as a barbarian ship carrying the disease. Historians in the documents and on the pages that I was able to find think that it likely came from Korea, specifically the Kingdom of Silla in Korea. However, what's crazy is 11 days later, by the 23rd, the military submitted a petition to the royal court basically asking for a tax exemption because the entire population of the village that had made contact with this ship was bedridden within 11 days.
Yep, that sounds about right. So the first stage of smallpox is there's a thing called prodromal. If you don't know what that means, when you feel crap before you get sick. So when you're going, oh, I think I'm coming down with a cold. That's called prodromal. That's the prodromal
Yeah, like
stage.
when you feel like somebody kicked you in the jaw and then just like knocked you out for good measure.
Yeah, it's sort of that's the part. That's the part. So you kind of go, oh, I just don't feel well. I think I'm about to come down with the flu or something. That's called prodromal.
For
With the
those of you
prodromal,
quick cutoff. There's a purpose for this. For those of you who are just podcasting and listening at home, quick trigger warning: we're about to describe some gnarly disease symptoms
very
and like
gnarly.
widespread death. So I just want to stop Mero before she gets too deep into it because I have read the script for her upcoming video and I know how bad this is going to get. And you all should get a warning that you're about to hear some
Yeah.
gross stuff. You'll be very glad that we eradicated this and very grateful you probably got vaccinated when you were a kid by the time you're at the end of this.
Yeah. So, in my script, I described the virus and what the virus does and stuff like that because and it's about 3 pages about 3 pages worth of information about the virus and the biology behind it, because I'm pretty good when it comes to learning about diseases and how it reacts and stuff. Like, I'm pretty strong-stomached with that, and even I was going, "Oh my god, this is fucking horrible." So,
Uh, Sable Eagle, I hope that she would have gone Australian because she is in fact Australian.
yep, and non-existent as well, so,
Mhm. She's a figment
anyway.
of your imagination.
Exactly. Anyway, yeah, so I was just going, this is horrific. This is absolutely horrific. So I'm not gonna go and about the symptoms right now. I'll talk about that a little bit further into the stream about some of the stuff. But with the prodromal stage of smallpox, it's not like, "Oh, I feel kind of bad. I think I'm about to get sick." It is flat out, you can't move. You're stupidly sick even in the prodromal stage. So if you can't move in the prodromal stage, you know the disease is going to get bad. And the prodromal stage in smallpox goes for about 2 weeks, which is very long.
Which
Very, very
explains the
long.
11 days of everybody being ridden. Like, that very much lines up with what smallpox does then.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't quite remember what the asymptomatic period is. I didn't look that up.
The
Remind me to do
incubation
that.
period.
No, the asymptomatic period, because all
Mhm.
diseases are asymptomatic before you get sick. And I
Mhm.
didn't look that up, so I'll have to look that up now, actually.
All
Give
right.
me a minute.
Well, while you look that up, by the 23rd, they submitted a petition to the royal court. So they asked for a tax exemption. They got it, but by then the emperor was starting to get reports. The royal court was getting reports from all over Japan because, as you know, people travel. And in ancient times, if you were traveling by foot or by horse or, whatever other animal you were traveling by, you can't exactly just stop because you feel like crap, right? Like, it's not like, there's a bunch of Airbnbs you can go stop at. You need to kind of get to where you're going, or at least to a nearby village. And of course, if somebody was sick and asymptomatic or just carrying and in that early period that she just described, you're going to start transferring. And smallpox is one of the most virulent diseases, like, out there in terms of how
It's
many disease vectors it can transfer through. It's up there with chickenpox.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but thankfully it only is human specific, like measles. So
So,
that's why we could remove it. We could eradicate it. There's
fun
no
fact, by the way,
yeah.
chickenpox can actually transfer through your spit.
Oh,
It
is
is
chicken
aerosolized.
Oh, that's nice. I can't seem to find it what the asymptomatic. Let's do some advanced Google fooing. Asymptomatic.
Singham says, "Hail Sithala, goddess of smallpox." Yeah, that actually, we're going to be talking a little bit about how particularly this particular plague actually helped cement Buddhism as being a major force in Japan, because the government actually turned to Buddhist monks and temples to kind of help with dealing with the plague, because, epidemiology didn't exist back then. So, of course, they very much believed that it was caused by demons, among other things. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it's interesting because India is one of the speculated origination points for smallpox, if I recall correctly. Like, either India or the Middle East, it's one of the two,
Or Africa.
or Africa.
Yep.
So let's get into that. So by 737, so remember, we got our first report on August 12th of 735. By 737 BCE, Japan's population was reduced by a third. So think about that. Like, roll a dice, 1 in 3 people that you know are just now dead. 1 in 3 people
Yeah,
that work in
or
the service industry are now dead.
roll a dice, so if it comes up evens, you're dead.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's
Like,
horrifying.
it is.
Genuinely horrifying disease.
And remember that this is prior to vaccination. This is a quote unquote virgin population in the sense of they had never been exposed to this disease before. So it just ripped through everybody.
I can't find asymptomatic stage of smallpox, by the way. If I mean, if somebody else wants to help Google foo that would be really awesome. But I can't find it.
So, since we're actually at the 15-minute mark and we are talking about the disease wiping out a third of the population, Mero, you want to tell us a little bit about how it gets to do that? Because it's kind of terrifying what this disease does to you. Again, we've got that trigger warning up for a good reason, guys. Like, if you like, there we're gonna be getting into some gross descriptions. There will be a few pictures up for those of you who aren't podcasting, like where you'll see the virus and there's an image of somebody who has it. It's not super graphic. It's not at the stage where like skin starts falling off yet in the picture, but it does show some of the early stages of the formation of like the pustules and stuff she'll be
Yeah.
talking about.
So if you hear my voice, that is the trigger warning. Okay. Let's just put it that way. I mean, it's a scary voice anyway, but it's so sexy. Okay. So basically it's it spreads through aerosols. So what happens is the rash kind of starts in the mouth and it spreads basically on the mouth and goes all over the body. And when I
That's
say all
inside your
over the
mouth
body,
too.
in this area, in the pie hole, not around the pie hole, in the pie hole. And imagine having blisters all throughout your mouth. And then they burst and all of the viruses come out and you go "Kuh," and you cough or you talk or whatever. And because it's spread through the same route as the virus that cannot be spoken about, that we have all lived through and still are living through, wear a mask and get vaccinated. So it's spread through aerosols and it's also
So
spread through.
I was just gonna
Allie.
say, imagine like if you've ever burned your tongue, like imagine that, but that's your entire mouth.
Yeah, it's
Like you just
fun.
like took a whole mouthful of the hottest tea ever, but it doesn't go away.
No, and it's lumpy as well.
Ugh.
Ugh. Oh
As
god,
somebody with
it's
texture issues, that's horrifying.
yeah. And anyway, so it spreads around the body, and these pustules, they form like a little a dimple on the inside. So you've got the pustules, and there's a small divot in the middle. And what it does is there's so many of them. They kind of join together all over the body, on your hands, on the bottom of your hands and your feet. And as you get sick, they spread and they turn kind of like little lumps, like peas or ball bearings under the skin, and they connect to each other, and then they start to and then it starts scabbing over, and you
I put up that second picture that you sent me of the person with all the bulbous things and like the
yeah.
beginning of the scab starting to come up.
Now everyone, I'm going to do a major trigger warning right now. If you are very squeamish, in about 3 seconds when I finish my countdown, block your ears. Okay, and 3, 2, 1, your skin basically falls off. You can come back now, by the way. If you're still blocked ears, you can come back. It's horrific. It is legitimately horrific. You can start to understand why 30% of people who have this disease dies. Anyway, once the scabs continue to fall off, you are still infectious. You are infectious until your final scab, or the last scab, falls off.
And the scabs are infectious too.
Scabs are infectious, but we'll talk about variolation a little bit later. Where using the scabs was a massive important part of the of variolation, which I talk a little bit about the difference between variolation, inoculation, vaccination in my video coming up. So I won't go too deep into that. However, once you've so if your scabs are all falling and people are walking around sweeping everything up, they also get sick. So it's mainly spread through coughing, and but you can also get it from other parts, like
So
of yeah.
So I've got your little diagram up. You said you wanted to explain a little bit about how they actually get into the cells, like what makes it so virulent.
This is really cool. When I was reading and researching smallpox, I was like, "Oh my god, this is absolutely fascinating." And again, in my video, I am going to be saying some very large words in an Australian accent. So I'm not going to say too many of them now because I'm going to have to go through my script and try and figure out where it is because yeah, but basically if you're looking at the screen now, you've got two types. So if anybody here remembers anything from the past 3 years, or know anything about viruses, there's two types of viruses. You've got encapsulated or naked viruses. Naked. Which and so basically what a virus is genetic material surrounded by a protein coat, um, which is called the capsid. And sometimes you have a lipid or fat layer surrounding the capsule. And I'm about to sneeze.
Maybe you're infectious. Bless you. Bless you. Bless you a third time.
Gracias. And I'm going to sneeze in about 30 seconds because for some reason that's what I do. Anyway, so there's this capsule is surrounded by this fat layer, and that's called encapsulated viruses. And they're actually easier to destroy, strangely, because you wash your hands. They more likely to dry out. They're more susceptible to environmental stresses. And so what happens with pox viruses in general, I couldn't find this specifically for smallpox, but because smallpox is a pox virus and they don't really change too much between species in the basic structure and infectious infection and stuff like that, it's sort of broadly accurate to smallpox. Anyway, so what happens is in smallpox, you can have, or in pox viruses in general, you can have two types, which is both the encapsulated and the naked versions of the viruses. And I just thought this was crazy.
And they're the same disease. Like they come from the
Same.
same baby virus. Like the
Yeah.
virus that infected you splits into two separate types.
Yeah, and depending on how, and I couldn't quite figure out how why it was different. But so the encapsulated version and the non-encapsulated version have different antigen making properties. So even though it's the same disease, your body has to attack smallpox as if it's two different viruses, which I thought was bloody crazy. I was like, what?
And smallpox can attack a pretty wide range of cells too.
Yep. It's and so what they think is that the non-encapsulated or the mature variant version of smallpox, it allows the smallpox to spread from person to person, and the EV, which off the top of my head I can't remember what I called it. It's somewhere around here. You'll learn about it in my other video. No, encapsulated virion. Sorry. It spreads from cell to cell. So
basically, the encapsulated one is inside your body, keeping the infection alive,
running
and
around.
The naked version is the one that it wants to go touch the skin of everybody you know.
Yeah, goes from person to person, which I thought was also wild. As I was reading about this virus, I was just going, "This is cool AF." And
for the record, there aren't a lot of other kinds of viruses that do that.
No. So pox viruses, the pox family does that. I'm not sure about other types. I mean, obviously, I didn't look into it because I don't want to do the equivalent of a PhD for a YouTube video. And trust me, there's a lot of information that I've learned where I'm like, I need a PhD to be able to explain this to you. Anyway, so, but another really gnarly, crazy thing about this disease, and I'm talking about this is so cool. Can you tell that I enjoy microbiology and virology, guys?
A little
So,
bit.
so this is a DNA virus. So you can have DNA viruses, RNA, single-stranded RNA, single-stranded DNA, all of the, you can name it, whatever. And I won't go into what the difference between RNA and DNA is. That's not important for this conversation. But with
Aren't the
smallpox,
majority of viruses RNA viruses?
I
Like,
think so. Yeah, the majority would be RNA because they're so old, but you can get DNA viruses as well. And so what happens is with most viruses, what they do is they inject the genetic code, especially for DNA viruses. They inject the genetic code, and the DNA virus swims towards the nucleus of the cell and uses the machinery inside the nucleus where the DNA of the cell is stored to become to make the virus's DNA and go and do the virusy thing.
which
With
viruses
pox,
are like many magnitudes tinier than cells. So they can make a
man,
lot of viruses in the amount of time that it would take to produce one single other cell because the cells are way bigger.
yeah, pox viruses don't do that. They actually have in the DNA of the pox virus the information needed to have the replication and transcription proteins. So basically, it goes into the cell, and rather having to go to the nucleus to go and do all the virusy things it needs to do, the DNA, the virus just goes in and just starts making things out of the in the cytoplasm of the cell, which
This the
is
cytoplasm's just
crazy.
the like goopy stuff
The,
on the inside of the cell. Like
yeah,
it's where everything
it's
moves between in the cell.
yeah. So the cytoplasm is like a gel kind of thing, and that's where all the organelles live in the cytoplasm. So basically, it goes in, it starts making all of its own little things, and then it just kind of blobs out the side of the cell, and it takes the cell wall with it, and that makes the encapsulated. I couldn't quite figure out how the non like the naked version or the mature variant version um, happens. I don't know why, and I couldn't figure out how. But the encapsulated version is that it makes all the little viruses, and it just goes blub 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 blub
So
blub
it
blub.
basically like hijacks the organelles for that.
No, it just does it inside the cell, like the cytoplasm in the cell, and as the the virus just kind of blobs out, just buggers off. It's basically, let's say, you know how you have that friend that comes over and as they leave, they steal an apple from your fridge or something like that for the road. It's kind of
Mhm.
like that. So it leaves the cell stealing a part of the cell along with it.
Which
So
can help which can eventually break a cell down just as
yeah,
readily as the explodey kind of viruses, which,
yes,
the typical way that you hear viruses explained is that they inject themselves right into the nucleus until they produce so many that the cell explodes.
yeah. Not the nucleus, the cell, just the cell in
Or the
general.
cell.
Yeah. So yeah, it injects itself and it replicates until the cell lyses, but those are the ones that are non-encapsulated. Those viruses are the non-encapsulated viruses. There's quite a few viruses that just go in, like HIV is one of these, is it comes into the cell and it just blobs out, taking basically the skin of the cell, and eventually the cell just falls apart because it doesn't have anything to stick it together. So that was really cool. I was sort of sitting just reading about pox viruses, and obviously I'm not going to go into the depths of the pox virus, like how it works and stuff like that, because there were a lot of very, 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 very complicated science, but yeah, I don't know. I just it's really cool and incredibly horrifying. Anyway, that's something.
So in terms of that though, let's talk a little bit about so there's 3 different variants apparently of the way that smallpox can present itself, and, like, this apparently also helps contribute to why the death rates are so high.
Yeah. I will interrupt also, Singham trigger warning Australian accent, that is true. Says, "Apparently from my own Googling, I found a range of 7 to 19 days of asymptomatic."
No, it's the
So
incubation
no,
period,
incubation period. I don't
which
know
might
whether or n
include that might include, the description that you were giving earlier of that, like, you feel sick, but you're not infectious yet, because I think that's
yeah.
what incubation usually refers to.
Yeah, yeah, that's prodromal. The first symptoms of smallpox usually show up about 12 to 14 days after a person has been exposed, although symptoms can take as little as 7 days or as long as 17 days to appear. Thank you, Singham. I really appreciate that. And sublegal is hepatitis A and C,
Sable
dengue.
legal.
Oh. Of course. Sorry, save legal. Sublegal. I mean, fair enough. Yep, all of them are DNA. So Zika, rabies, MERS, SARS.
Those are
Yeah,
RNA, like
D
yeah, it says
oh,
hepatitis A and
RNA,
C,
sorry.
dengue, Zika, rabies, MERS, SARS, Lassa, Ebola, all RNA. Hepatitis B, Epstein-Barr, parvopox, polyoma, adenovirus, cytomegalovirus,
Megalovirus.
JC virus, all DNA.
Yep. So, Alethea, my favorite types of science topics, super cool and kind of terrifying. Yeah, you're in the right stream for this one.
So, getting back to let's talk a little bit about the 3 different kinds of the way that smallpox can show up, because what's interesting is the same viral DNA, the same base strain, can manifest 3 completely different ways depending on just how unlucky you are.
Yeah, or technically fourth, but I didn't really talk about that in my video because there's modified. So there's 3 ones if you haven't been inoculated against smallpox, but there's a 4th type if you have been inoculated. So the 4th type is called modified smallpox, and it basically means you have a less powerful version because you've been inoculated. And get vaccinated, everyone. Go get vaccinated for all of the viruses and bacteria. Just do it. Get vaccinated.
I mean, to be
Um,
honest, like the entire conclusion of this stream is it's an amazing thing that vaccines exist.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the first type is just your standard everyday run of the mill smallpox, and that's the smallpox I described earlier. Is the 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 pustules in your mouth start, and then you go and oh, sorry, trigger warning again. Australian accent is the trigger warning. So the pustules in
Also
your
the one
mouth
on the screen.
and the one on the screen. Yep, pustules in your mouth. Then you basically turn into this very bumpy person, and then your skin falls off, and then you're done. That's if you're lucky enough to survive. There's a upwards of 40% death rate in some, and there's no cure. We don't have a cure. We don't need one, but there's no cure.
The
To
cure
be
is get
honest,
vaccinated.
the cure is get vaccinated or get yeah. So that's the first one. And there's upwards of a 40% death rate. Usually they say 30% as that's the general, but 20 to
But that's like the
40%.
full pandemic, depending on like that's taking all of them into account. But like the majority of the death rate seems to come from the last variant, which you really
Yeah.
don't want to be the unlucky one to get that
Oh,
one.
when I talk about this last type, I am absolutely going to say trigger warning. Okay. So the second one is malignant smallpox, which is very malignant. What happens is, so you have that prodromal stage. Remember when I was talking about you feel crap, but you don't have the full blown disease. The malignant stage actually lasts a little bit longer. Like the prodromal stage lasts a little bit longer, and then when you go into the pustules side of things, rather than being lumpy, it's actually you have this smooth and your skin kind of gets velvety, which ugh. And then you die. It's almost always fatal if you have malignant smallpox, and unfortunately it's almost always children who get this. I don't know why it presents this way. I couldn't quite figure out why. Which is
Maybe researchers don't even know.
maybe it's very, very sad. And so I don't know if there's like, I don't know much other than that. You have a longer prodromal stage, you don't get pustules, and then you die. And then you have, and this is the part where I was going, oh my God, this is horrifying. This is. And I am going to give the trigger warning here. The first time, that was only a warm up. This is where it's going to get bad. It's called hemorrhagic smallpox. And it is exactly what it says. So what happened?
For the record, by the way, you're rolling the dice as to which one of these you get, just so you know. Like,
Yes.
it's a smaller percentage of the population gets the hemorrhagic or the malignant, but like anybody could. We have no
Mhm.
idea what causes the difference, except for the fact that malignant's more likely to hit kids.
Yeah, and there is a couple of ideas about why hemorrhagic ones work. Like there's like if you're pregnant, I agree, Aikita, vaccines should be mandatory. If you're pregnant or you have platelet problems, there is a chance you're more likely to get malignant. That was about the best that I could find. Again, all of this information is from the 60s because 60s, 70s, and 80s, because we don't need to we don't have, it's not it's not very ethical to give people a smallpox anymore. Like, I mean, it never was, but ethical, but it's super not ethical
There was a
now.
time that a bunch of people that convinced themselves that because of skin tones, it was in fact okay to give people that stuff. And we don't need to talk about that part of history. We're further
No,
back than that. We're just talking
no.
about what happens when it rips through a population with no control.
Yes.
Because, oh
So,
boy, we haven't even gotten into what this did to Japan yet. Like, we lost
yeah,
a third of a population. This is the first round, guys.
yeah. So, hemorrhagic smallpox, you bleed, obviously, and the blood in your will come through your skin, like come through the capillaries in your skin. You bleed into your pustules. You bleed through your mucous membranes. The
Which
whites of
includes your
your
eyes, by the
in your
way.
eyes, the whites of your eyes turn black. People go purple from this. It's thick and sticky. When they did uh autopsies on people who had hemorrhagic smallpox, it was throughout their organs. It was everywhere in the body.
Well, without your
And
blood, you'd basically be slowly suffocating while you can still breathe.
you yeah, you can understand why it was almost always fatal. About 2% of people got hemorrhagic smallpox, yet it was responsible for 3 to 25% of deaths.
That is terrible, Akeda. That is the absolute worst pun that I think I have ever seen on this channel. It's not
Ooh.
ethical to give people smallpox. Isn't that a blanket statement? If you know anything about the
Ooh,
history of the Americas, you'll know why that is terrible. Bad,
that is
Akeda. Like
horrible.
this, everybody get the spray bottle out.
Yeah, and smallpox spread to all over the world. I haven't quite done all of my research into how it how to speak. I haven't done a lot of research on how to speak. But it did spread to Indigenous Australians as well. But we didn't do to the Indigenous people what the Americans did to the Indigenous people. So that's a bonus, maybe. So that's
At
basically
least
the
it wasn't on purpose.
yeah, it wasn't on purpose. So we didn't do that type of genocide. We did multiple other types of genocide, but we didn't do that type of genocide. So yay, Australia.
So let's get back to all right. So this stuff just hit the hell out of Japan. What happens? All right. So Emperor Shomu's officials at the Bureau of Medicine, he goes to the experts at the time, which remember, we're talking about the 8th century CE. For those of you who aren't familiar, CE is the modern non-religious variant on AD or Anno Domini, I believe is how you pronounce it. So CE is Common Era. So it's marked at the same place, but it's not as religiously significant. So he goes to his people and he's like, what do I do? Like, a third of my population is dying, the economy is absolutely wrecked. Like, what do we do to contain this? And they recommend a prohibition against drinking water, which at this time might have actually been a halfway decent suggestion. Given, think about this, we didn't have water purification back then. So basically, people's sewage and stuff sometimes got dumped in rivers. So water wasn't exactly the safest thing to drink. A lot of people drank like either beer or wine, or, like sake, which is rice wine, in various like countries in Europe at this time, because like the alcohol was more likely to kill most of the microorganisms, including the yeast that fermented it. They basically have a party and then like die in their own excrement, which is with the alcohol, it makes things feel good. But like, think about like the beer and wine and stuff being made at this time was also much lower alcohol content than the more refined stuff that we make today. So like, that was just your everyday drink from a pretty young age. Because it was a lot safer. So they talked about prohibition against drinking water, an encouragement to eat boiled rhubarb, and a recommendation to apply powdered silkworm cocoons to the boils. Now, those two, I'm not sure if they have any effectiveness at all. But like,
Probably
they
not.
were trying. Maybe the powdered silkworm cocoons, like, silk is pretty soft, so maybe that was just like a comfort for people. But obviously, this did nothing to contain the virus. So Shomu ended up going to the Buddhist monks, and he was like, "Hey, I need you to do two things. I need you to read sutras to all of the afflicted people that are in these like horrible hospices, like type. Because remember, hospitals were horrible places back in the day too. And we also need you to add some prayers to the kami, because Emperor Shomu saw Shinto and Buddhism as being in like potentially interchangeable, or rather, like, syncretism was pretty rampant in Japan at this time. And so he was like, hey, both of these beings exist in the Buddhist universe, so I need you to do both. And what ended up happening was like the disease ran its initial course. We lose a third. Japan's entire like infrastructure, their economy, it was trashed. Which, like, if you lose a third of your people, like, that's a third of all your artisans, that's a third of all your merchants, it's a third of all everybody.
Just think of how much COVID, sorry, who shall not be named, get how hugely disrupted that was to
And that
our
was 1% of the
yeah, that
population.
yeah, that was like 1 to 2% of the population got killed. So that's horrific.
I mean, this is even a third of your government officials that are just like
Mm,
gone.
yep. Like, even though everyone's like, oh yeah, haha, politicians gonna, but these are the people responsible for running the country. Like, we got riots over people shutting down for 6 weeks. Imagine if a third of the people who were supposed to run the country died. Yeah, so
So, like,
time.
and not just the people who ran the country, though, the people who like built stuff, the people like this is during a time where you couldn't just go to a store and get shoes. What happens if the shoemaking expert in your village dies? Where are you going to get your shoes?
Yeah.
Like, his son might need to learn a whole bunch of stuff, or like apprentice at another thing, and then people aren't getting footwear for a while if it's a small enough village that you only got the one. So like, basically, we needed a stimulus package of epic proportions. So
Mm.
Shomu came up with a plan, and that was he decided to do a variant on the stimulus package, which was that he took court funds and he spent a ton of money building provincial Buddhist temples to help keep order and to stimulate the economy. Now, some of these were some massive projects. But basically, what he did was, because he built all these temples, they became both kind of centers of religion, but they also helped to spread an ideology that was very helpful for helping people recover from the anger and frustration of, well, losing a third of everybody they knew. So, this included the Buddhist concept of merit, which is a bit different in definition than the English word would suggest. But like merit making helped to bring hope and stability to the population. So, this is a vast oversimplification. And if somebody is a Buddhist and you understand this better than me, feel free to give a description in the live chat and I'll read it off. But from what I was able to find, merit involves taking actions considered virtuous in the Buddhist system, which include things like charitable giving, like feeding Buddhist monks and the poor, reciting sutras, funding temples and other Buddhist arts, producing or sponsoring Buddhist artworks, especially sculptures, studying Buddhist literature or listening to it. Basically, they're things that both do good for your community and do good for you. And it's thought to do good for your soul and your mind, and also to have physical positive ramifications on the outside world, kind of like karma.
I will jump in and tell everyone my real name is Meredith, and the word merit drives me crazy because I'm like, what? Anyway.
So it has like associations with purification and blessings, but it doesn't really have like the connotations of like I deserve this that the word like merit kind of brings up in English. Because when you think of something on your merit, right? Like that's you're so awesome, therefore you deserve it. Like that's what merit kind of means. Buddhist merit's a little different than that.
Yeah.
So Singham says that merit is a part of karma. So merits and demerits don't act instantly, they take a while. So when you think of people doing these good things, it's not instant gratification. Like it's not like a karmic slot machine.
Yeah.
How would you feel about living in a meritocracy, Marrow?
I would hate it. I mean, I kind of hate it already because meritocracies are fundamentally flawed.
It's also a myth.
It's also a myth. Yep.
That's a topic for another stream. Anyway.
Meritocracy. Yeah, actually, no, that's all right. Meritocracy is fine. I'm okay with that one.
So, basically the other interesting thing about merit, by the way, is that it also applies to your ancestors. So like if you do a whole bunch of good stuff, if you have a recently dead relative, it's thought to help them too.
Can I go
Which,
slightly
you
off
know, you
topic?
could see why that would help bring order to a society, right?
Yeah. Also, can I go slightly off topic because we didn't have an opportunity to do this right at the beginning, but I talked about about this before. Speaking of recently dead ancestors, it was my mum's 1-year anniversary of her dying of cancer. So please, everyone, go get tested for cancer. Please, everyone. I don't know if you want to burn a candle or something in her honor, that'd be great. But go get tested for cancer. Go get a blood test for cancer. Just go get tested. I don't give a crap. It's not worth it. Go get a skin cancer test as well, because just go get checked out.
Wear
That's my
sunscreen.
thing. Wear sunscreen, wear a hat, blah blah blah. Get tested for cancer because my mum died of ovarian cancer, and she had almost no symptoms until she died. Basically, 6 weeks before she died.
Since we're
Thank
kind
you,
of on
Akita.
this Since you were kind of on this topic, you said that you had mentioned you wanted to bring this up. If it seems like we're cutting each other off a lot by accident, part of that is actually a delay on StreamYards. You guys might not see it on your end, like for on the playback, but for some reason, Marrow comes through a little bit later on my end than she should. And so sometimes I'll accidentally cut her off. Sometimes it's purposeful, like when I was like, hey, let's get the trigger warning out of the way. But like
Yes.
most of the time, it's accidental and it's caused by the StreamYard delays. We've talked about it. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to leave gaps for each other to talk a little better. But if it seems like I'm cutting her off, it's not a disrespect thing. It's very much like we're dealing with issues with the software.
Yeah, it's because I don't exist, and we have to try and use like physics just delays when you need to go through the portal. So yeah, so that's the reason why. If just in case anybody's like, oh, Ali keeps cutting Marrow off, she doesn't. It's because it's what happens when you don't exist. It's a thing.
So Singham, who is explaining this from a Hindu perspective, says the idea behind I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, or merit, is that since every action that gets performed has a physical and a non-physical result, a fruit, and by performing, oops, I accidentally clicked the wrong one, actions, you basically plant the seeds for good results in the distant future, either in this life or the next.
That's cool. I like that idea. Just be
Zodiac
good.
MS says, get tested. My aunt and her mother fought it before they got tested and found out it was genetic in their whole family. Yeah, there are lots of, we're still like understanding the links between genetics and risk factors for cancers, because some people can have the genetic risk factor and just go their whole life without it. And some people have none and they suddenly get it. Like,
Yeah, my
genes are
mum.
wild and unstable. And like, a third of the cells in your body or 2/3 of the cells in your body don't even belong to you. So who knows what kind of like screwery they get up to.
Yeah. So, and there's also hints about bacteria can cause cancer, like, or
Viruses
help.
can.
But yep. So it's all weird. So I'm
HPV
sorry to
is
hear that.
basically a one-way ticket to cervical cancer.
Yeah, and other cancers as well. But I'm sorry to hear about that, Zodiac Emma. I hope you don't have that gene mutation. And if you, yeah, so hopefully you're all good. But that's horrible. That's horrible. Yeah. So get tested for cancer. Get your vaccines. Listen to your doctors. We are YouTubers, but so we can only
That doesn't
just
make
tell
either of
you.
us an expert.
No, it doesn't. But at least I can tell you from my own experiences, you do not want to see what I went through.
Yeah,
So
both of my grandmas died to cancer pretty close to the same time. Both of the ones that were still alive. And actually all three of my grandmas, because I had like one of my mom remarried. So like one of them died when I was 12 or 13 and she died from skin cancer. One of them also died from skin cancer that had spread everywhere, and the other one died from intestinal cancer that had gotten into her pancreas by the time they found it and she collapsed.
Jesus Christ.
And like two of them, my stepfather's mother and my mom's mother, who I was much closer to both of them than they both died around the same time, though I did get to spend a lot more time with my mother's mother than I did my stepfather's mother.
Mm.
So anyway, off of the
Back on
depressing
topic.
topic of cancer, yeah, other
And
things
back
that can
onto
kill
the
you in
really,
horrible, horrible, slow
yeah,
ways.
on the actual other non-depressing topic of smallpox.
Well, I mean, on this slightly less depressing topic, because if you got the jab, you are far less likely to die from it.
Mhm.
Whereas there is no jab for cancer,
No.
except for
Uh,
HPV.
uh,
Get the jab for
and
HPV.
lung cancer as well. I think Cuba developed a lung cancer vaccine.
So coming back to what we did, so economic stimulus. So we had tons of success. Merit making proliferating through the culture and the initial temple projects majorly had a positive impact on the economy of Japan following losing a third of the population. Like, it brought a lot of hope back to people. People got very excited and they stepped up their contributions. Like, they ended up engaging in the most extensive state merit making project in Japanese history, including commissioning a 50-foot tall bronze statue of Buddha. It's a Vairocana Buddha at the temple at Todaiji.
Does it
Nearly
still
half.
exist?
It does. It is still the largest statue of that type of the Buddha. Nearly half the population contributed to building the sculpture in some way, whether
Wow.
it was through their tax money or through their labor or like contributing the bronze to it. It was completed in 749. It used up all the available copper in the country and it deforested large sections of the country. It took almost 30 years for the forests to start like regrowing to the point where they could be used again because of just how massive the statue and the surrounding temple were. Shomu then was such an avowed Buddhist that he actually abdicated the throne upon completion and became a monk.
Huh.
So the pandemic didn't return during his reign, though another hit in 763 CE. So for those of you paying attention, that's a little under 30 years. It's about 29 years later. Um, it hit in 763, and a total of 28 more pandemics of smallpox hit prior to 1206 CE.
That's insane.
28 on a near 30-year increment.
So to put it into perspective, monkeypox came out last year, was it? I don't know. My sense of time does not exist. And the last person to have smallpox was in the late 1970s, early 80s. Can't remember. I haven't got to that part of the script yet. And so that is 50 years. So and the reason why it's keeps coming round, keep going around, is because the herd immunity, basically. Herd immunity, as
Is
people,
also part of the reason why you need to get the jab, because there are some
yeah,
people who can't get the jab, and you being immune means you can't get it to give it to the person who couldn't get the jab.
exactly. And so even though that's like 40 years ago, basically, 40 to 50 years ago, and again, it's smallpox, like the virus, there is enough people who are immune to a pox virus, i.e., smallpox, that the world's population, herd immunity population, has plummeted because people are dying who's had the smallpox vaccine. And so that's why monkeypox is starting to come out. So you're going to be finding a lot of these pox viruses that are zoonotic, so it can jump from animals to humans or to humans to animals. Zoonotic blood, so zoonotic pox viruses is going to start coming back because smallpox, people are starting to die. Back when these plagues were coming
We
around,
still get vaccinated for smallpox. Most people do, but like part of the problem is that with the anti-vax movements, herd immunity is decreasing.
yeah, smallpox, people who join the military in America get the smallpox vaccine. Which, is kind of wild, but I can understand why, because it still stops them from getting other pox viruses as well, because they are very, very closely related and do confer immunity between species, in the same way that they found that the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine also offers some protection against other coronaviruses, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
And
I noticed
so,
that ever since I got the jab, I've gotten a lot less colds, just like generally. Like normally cold and flu season is terrible, and I just barely this year.
yeah, yeah. Um, so so that's really cool. But back when this was all going along in the 700 CE, sorry, um,
CE.
the whatever word, CE, people's life expectancy was a lot smaller than it used to be. So the
In
fact
part
that
because so many kids died from smallpox.
yes. So the fact that, it was the timeline shortened is not that surprising. So if it was happening today, you would only see maybe a 50 or 60-year cycle between, yeah, so that would explain that. I just thought I'd just jump in and explain something which 98% of you probably already knew.
So, talking a little bit about these 28 freaking outbreaks, they
Jesus
actually
Christ.
changed Japanese culture in a ton of different ways, including the fact that Emperor Shomu turned to Buddhism. All of these regional temples heavily increased the amount of syncretism between Buddhism and Shinto and kind of cemented a lot of Buddhism's power, both as sort of a state apparatus and just also religiously. A lot of people were born into or converted to Buddhism. And so it started to shift the way that Japanese culture, it became a lot more communal, even more so than it already was. In addition to that, future victims were primarily children. So disease management shifted from the state level to the village and household level, which there's a whole paper that I found, which I don't know how reliable it is because I couldn't find the originating journal, but it was the citations in it were from verified historians. So I used it when I was doing research. They talked about how there were actually like disease guides and parenting guides that would talk about smallpox and how to manage it and quarantining kids. Entire new forms of poetry and styles of art were born out of smallpox. Um, in addition to that, offerings were also started being made to disease demons, and festivals were established in some villages to sing and dance the demons out of said villages. It was believed that they were afraid of the color red and dogs, though in Okinawa specifically, people would try to comfort the demons by sanshin music and lion dances that were performed in front of a patient that was dressed in all red. These were accompanied by offerings of flowers and incense, whereas like the offerings in some other villages would have been like food primarily. Some of these smallpox dances are actually still performed in some rural villages too.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. That's
Um, so, like, medical advice books during the Edo period included advice dealing with smallpox, and surviving smallpox actually became part of their coming of age rituals. Which there's a ritual called the Sasayu. I don't know if they still do it in different regions in Japan, like in rural villages, but in like Japanese history, huge parties were thrown after a kid recovered from smallpox. Because if you were a kid in Japan, you got smallpox, and 1 in 3 of your friends died to smallpox when you were a kid. So,
that's
if a kid recovered from smallpox, family and friends were invited for a massive feasting celebration, and it was an entire coming of age ritual that they would throw.
that's insane. That's like imagine we don't even have like that'd like be like a quinceañera or but rather than congratulations, you're 16, it's like congratulations, you survived the plague.
Yeah, you were
That's
one of
crazy.
like, so 2 out of 3 kids survived the plague, 1 in 3 did not.
That's so sad. That's so, so sad. Like, um, imagine just the intergenerational trauma that people went through, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is still echoes of that intergenerational trauma happening today.
Well,
It's
remember,
like,
smallpox was only eradicated as of the 80s, so, like,
yeah,
this plague cycle was still repeating in Japan.
mm, yeah. That's one of the things that kind of really frustrates me about people who are like, "Oh, why are you so afraid of a little virus?" Kind of like, you shouldn't be let fear um, control your life. And I'm just like, it's kind of very reasonable to be afraid of something that's going to kill you in a very slow and painful way. And one of the things that I've I've read, like I listened to a podcast that gave me a lot of my information. This podcast will kill you. I haven't been able to verify their information about this piece of information, but I haven't looked very hard. But this little tidbit, which is extra horrifying, is that apparently, when you're sick with the flu or something like that, and you kind of get zonked out, you feel like crap, and you sleep. Um,
Yeah, like,
smallpox doesn't
especially after get the COVID jab.
Yeah. Smallpox doesn't give you the zonked out feeling. So you are awake and aware of what's happening to you. And there's nothing you can do. You can't sleep because you're not zonked out. You don't feel like you want to fall asleep for hours on end. So you're aware, totally aware of what's happening to you.
I mean, like, let's face it, I am absolutely justified in being terrified of the inside of my mouth being turned into the back of a cane toad and then bleeding out of my eyeballs. I would just rather not do that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of not doing that too. Yeah. So being afraid of things that are scary is not a weakness, guys. Just gonna point it out there.
Yeah,
Hi
I mean,
Shay, by the way.
there's no merit in being in denial. Oh, hey, Shay.
No.
So we have house chickenpox parties should be celebrating the pox, beating the pox rather than spreading. Well, I mean, like, hopefully people aren't having chickenpox parties anymore because we have the jab for chickenpox now. And, like, as somebody who suffered from shingles not too long ago, I highly recommend getting the chickenpox vaccine if you have not had
Mhm.
chickenpox and you've got access to it, because it is a heck of a lot better than getting the virus and then having it come back on you when you get really stressed out.
Yeah.
0 out of 10 would not recommend. Having survived shingles, which actually, let's talk a little bit about chickenpox. Chickenpox is a bit different than smallpox. It's actually from the measles family.
Yeah, it's varicella zoster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Cool.
I remember that. I always forget that.
So, fun fact about chickenpox and what shingles is: it stays in your cells. It actually attacks your nerve cells specifically. It stays in them dormant. Nobody knows what reactivates it apart from age, immunocompromisation, which, of course, I've got 2 different autoimmune diseases. So that's so much fun. And
Mm,
stress are the big risk factors. So, like, if you're over 50, which I'm not, if you have immunocompromisation, which, again, I have 2 different autoimmune diseases, so that's a lot of fun. And or if you're under stress, which this happened a few weeks after a car accident, so whole bunch of pain and stress there.
mm,
So
yes.
if you are under those things, chickenpox can just wake up in your nerve cells and create these horrible, horrible blisters. And it starts with the worst, most nerve-wrenching pain. Like imagine like an asthma attack or a side stitch, but on steroids. And it spreads across the side of your ribs. Typically, it can show up in other areas, but like a good chunk of cases, it shows up on the side of your ribs. And then you get these clusters of blisters that
Oh.
burst and they ooze and then they scab. And the thing is like that's not even the worst part. Like the itching and the pain from that's not even the worst. No, the cramps in your ribs and on your side and all through your back and everywhere else. The horrible muscle cramps are the worst part of it. So, if you can get access to the jab and you weren't forced to get it when you were a kid, if you did get the jab when you were a kid because you were young enough to have gotten it, thank your parents. Thank the doctor that gave it to you. Thank the gods that it exists because shingles is terrible and you are way less likely to get it if you got the jab.
Yep. And also, it can cause blindness as well. I had a client who got shingles, and their shingle got to about here on their face. Like he was centimeters away from from going blind. So it's a very scary disease. And yes, Shay, that is, I helped with that. Yes. I am the person who helped get Stephen Anderson banned in Australia. Yes. I won't claim the whole thing, but yes.
Funnily enough, I actually helped her. The very first script I ever helped her with was the one kind of covering the chaos that happened after your other interview.
Yes.
Complain. That's how we became friends, funnily enough. Yep. A person who neither of us associate with anymore introduced the two of us, and it was one of the really good things that came out of that.
Yeah, and also complain. Yeah, also I just want to say a moment of silence for every single person called Stephen Anderson who was at that Stephen Anderson, and if they want to go traveling worldwide. Because yes.
Oh, Akana, happy to hear that. Just got my shingle vaccine on your recommendation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Zodiac Emma, my grandma on my mum's side had shingles for several years. What? Oh my gosh.
Ow. Mine only lasted for a couple weeks because I caught it within the first couple days and like I realized that there was something wrong like when the blisters started like clustering. So I went to an urgent care and I was able to get antivirals and the antivirals kicked my whole ass. Like don't get me wrong, antivirals will kick your entire ass, but they also reduced the symptomatic time down to like a week and a half when it could have been like months.
Yeah.
So if you start to get symptoms that are reminiscent of shingles, no matter what your age is, go to the freaking urgent care or your doctor if you can. Get tested, like have them run a swab on the blisters and stuff, and like they'll probably give you antivirals just as a just in case if it looks enough like it, because you have to get it within the first 3 days or it won't help. That's what I was told by the doctor. That's not something I verified through research. This is the doctor told me you have to take the antivirals within the first 3 days or they're not effective.
Yeah. And Sable Eagle is talking about giant hogweed. Yes, I've heard about that. Yeah, it's really bad, and it also gets worse when you go out in the sun. I mean, if you want to talk about horrific plants, you can also talk about the gimpy tree, which is also known as the suicide tree for very good reasons. Anyway, do you want to go back to
Japan? So, like, it's interesting. It's interesting though because like smallpox has actually shaped the culture of a number of different places, but like in Japan specifically, like I said, there was an entire new variant of like poetry that was spawned during this time. In the Edo period, you get this change in like how parenting was dealt with. You have entire like village protocols for things like some of the earliest epidemiological ideas, like quarantine for 6 people and stuff, like in Japan, started to kind of emerge at the village and household level. So you end up with rituals that lasted all the way to this day, syncretism between two major traditions, and like the cementing of Buddhism as being this just major power player in Japan. Because like it was there in Japan, obviously, prior to this, but the government's backing and these major like provincial temple projects really gave a lot more power to the Buddhist monks and spread those ideas a lot further.
Yeah. Which is wild. It's wild to think that a disease can be so important sociologically.
Well,
Um,
I mean, think about like even like the flu, right? The Spanish flu comes sweeping through, which we you did a whole video on why you shouldn't call things after
yeah,
countries or people, but
yeah.
like
I was like, my eye was twitching there. The
well, I mean that's
1918.
yeah, the
Yeah.
1918 flu pandemic, it swept through the country and it had major impacts on the world war that was going on at the time.
Hmm. Yep. The reason why they called it the Spanish flu is because Spain was neutral during World War One.
One.
Uh,
That would have
um,
been one.
that
We
was
didn't
yeah,
have the big bad whose name you can't say on YouTube yet.
yeah.
He was off
So
doing
when
something else.
yes, he was fighting in World War One. Um, yeah, in World War One they were neutral, so the Spanish media was able to report on new this new disease that was running around. However, the Allies and the Germans couldn't because it would destroy morale. So, but yeah, that was why they called it Spanish flu, even though it either started in they're pretty sure it started in Kansas, but it could have also started in China. So
I mean, it's way less ability to track epidemiological profiles back then. Like a lot of stuff
yeah,
is just estimates based off of reporting because you can only repeat history once. It only happens
yes,
once. You only have what gets recorded at the time.
yes, and also it does tend to rhyme, not repeat. Yes. Also, Zodiac Emma, I agree. I honestly don't know how I'm alive. A few years ago, I found out that when I was young, from birth to 4 years old, my mum made sure I wasn't vaccinated for anything. Anyway, please vaccinate.
I hope that you were able to get some vaccines later on in life. Like that, I know that a lot of kids of anti vax parents like go and they try to find out what they can get as an adult.
Yeah. If if I was to suggest a vaccine, if you found out that you were not vaccinated, my first thing would be is go and get your measles vaccine.
Yeah, MMR.
Yeah, MMR, and the reason is that measles, even like as an adult, is really bad. But measles also causes immune amnesia. So basically, what it does is it wipes out of all of your memory T cells, um, like destroys
Which
your
then
memory
gets rid
till
of any of the immunities you already had.
yes. So get your measles first. If you escape from anti-vax parents, go get your measles ones first, because if you get measles, it wipes out your immune memory, and you've got to basically start from the beginning. So
And
yeah,
some modern variants of the MMR vaccine actually include chickenpox as well. So you'll be killing two birds with one stone with that one if you didn't get chickenpox when you were younger, because again,
yeah,
you don't want to get it, especially as an adult.
especially as an
Chickenpox
adult.
can
Yeah,
kill you as an adult.
yeah. For some reason, it's so much worse as not an adult, and I have no idea why, to be honest.
Okay,
Um,
it sounds like Emma was able to get some vaccines when they ended up. I don't know if you use she her pronouns because I haven't seen pronouns, so I'm going to say they. Looks like they had to go back to the doctor when they were 4 or 5, so they were able to get vaccinated later on.
that's excellent. That's excellent. No. Oh, that is so good. Good news. If anybody hasn't seen the video by H Bomber Guy, uh, a defensive vaccine or something like that,
It's a
you need to
definitive
watch.
debunking of the anti-vax movement.
Yeah, it's genuinely one of the more horrific things I've watched. He does a very good job. Very, very good job. So,
A lot of people making a lot of money lying to you about science. That's for damn
yep.
sure.
RFJ, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr. It is made millions of dollars during the pandemic. Millions of dollars. So whenever you hear about people go, oh, follow the money when it comes to the anti-vax, like, oh, they're making lots of money. It's like, yeah, have you actually looked at your side as well? So yeah.
So
All right.
that's most of what I was able to find on this particular pandemic and how it affected Japan. Do you guys have any questions for Marrow about smallpox, or do you have any questions for us about the stuff that we've covered? Like if you want to learn a bit more about Buddhist merit making, we've got Singham in the chat, which clearly knows a lot about like merit making in the Vedic traditions. but this is most of what we were able to find. Smallpox is horrific, guys. Like,
Mhm.
there's a very good reason why we say that there's an upbeat note to this, which is we wiped smallpox out through herd immunity and vaccinations. And like, anti-vaxxers are determined to bring it back, which
Yeah.
is not great. And now you know all the reasons why you don't want it to come back. But like, the
No.
good news is that despite the echoes that this has had on Japanese culture, and to be honest, indigenous culture, American culture, South American culture, smallpox has devastated the planet.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
there's still this plague that happened in the 700s that you've never heard of that utterly changed a country that you're probably fascinated by. Because let's face it, the majority of my audience, a lot of y'all are weebs. A lot of people
Yep.
love anime. I make anime references. The comments explode with the jokes that I've told, like in some of my videos. I know that this is something you guys are interested in.
Mm.
When I found out about just how much this plague changed Japanese history, like, this was something that I just had to fall down the rabbit hole on, because it's also kind of a combination of Marrow and my expertise. Like, Marrow knows quite a lot about like epidemiological stuff and microbiology, and I'm fascinated by like sociology and the ways that like events like this can completely just change the course of history for a whole country.
Yeah. I do want to quickly touch on variolation or inoculation or vaccines. So variolation is a term that's only used when it comes to smallpox. So you can't variolate yourself against measles, but you can inoculate yourself against measles and smallpox. So it's only specifically for smallpox. And it started the I don't know how they figured it out. I wouldn't be surprised if they figured out variolation because you know how I said that smallpox is spread through aerosols,
Do you
but it can
want to
also
define variolation, inoculation, and
okay. All
such?
right. So yeah. So
Reminding
variolation.
Marrow that not everybody knows what these things mean.
I mean, I didn't know that. I didn't know the definitions until last night. So variolation is basically taking smallpox and putting it into your body to create a lesser disease.
So, like, bits and
Inocul
pieces of smallpox.
Yeah, so basically the scraping of the skin, like the getting a pustule and sort of poking the pustule into the skin of a healthy person. So a person who's got smallpox, they take a little bit of that and then sort of stab it into the skin, and that person gets gets infected with smallpox through the skin. They also used it through ground up scabs as well. They would
Ew.
ground it up and they'd snort it, which is
Eh,
disgusting.
oh my god.
I know, I was a bit
Ugh.
grossed out about that. And so that's variolation and inoculation. And inoculation and vaccination basically are interchangeable, but I think vaccination is more of a like an updated version of actual, injecting people with the disease. So so basically, I don't know how they figured it out, but so when vaccine when you try and when you get full-blown smallpox, it's aerosolized like SARS-CoV-2, and you breathe it in, and then you get sick. But if
We do
you
have a comment from Makeda that was pertinent to your previous topic of conversation.
I thought variolation was discovered when someone observed that people who got cowpox. No, no, that's the vaccination part. So variolation was coined talking about the whole you get the whole situation where they purposely infect you with smallpox through other means. So that's variolation. So vaccination is, Sable Eagle says it's vaccination from vaccinia virus, which is the agent that causes cowpox. So remember how I said that pox viruses are all in the same family, and if you are immune from one pox virus, you're likely to have either full or less, or
Either reduced,
reduced.
yeah, either full
Yeah,
immunity or partial immunity.
yeah. Yeah,
So kind
and
of like if you have if you get immune to one variant of say the swine flu, if there's if another variant that is slightly tweaked come up, you might not have as bad of a disease if you say got the shot for it.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, um,
Get your
so
flu shots, people.
get your shots. And also when it comes to SARS-CoV-2, every 6 months is what they're suggesting. So which I know it's annoying, it's every 6 months, but it's better than long COVID, which both Ali and I have. So,
Yay! We talked about that
yay!
on previous streams. Go back through the Xenia Bridge archive if you want to hear us talking about the horrible, horrible things that we've dealt with. We
Mhm.
both were there for each other through both of our diseases. Funnily
Yeah,
enough, I was
yeah,
I was messaging Marrow every day. Tell me you are not dead.
yeah. Um,
Okay, so you were
s
talking about variolation and inoculation. The
yeah,
difference.
yeah. And so what they did is that, so when, you got sick from so when they took the scabs and ground it up and inhaled it, which is, um,
Ugh.
you
Did you need
they
to repeat that part?
yes, and I'll say it again if you need me to. Um, so what happens is that is not the preferred way for the virus to enter the body. So, it doesn't replicate as well, and so the body is able to fight it off better. Although when it comes to variolation, there was actually a decent reason why some people didn't like the idea of it, because 2% of people who were variolated died, and some people got very, very sick. So that I understand. But back then they didn't know about the connection between cowpox and smallpox. Um, and so when
I mean, 2% is still a lot less than
then
30%.
30,
So
yeah,
that's still a
but
pretty big reduction.
yeah,
That's about double the people who died from the pandemic whose name we can't talk about.
yeah, exactly. Singham is earning that Australian accent trigger warning. I see. Yes, and so they had been doing variolation for millennia when somebody who was English decided to go push it in England and Europe. So to say her name was Lady Mary something something Monton something, I can't remember, Montague or something. Um, and she really pushed to bring it into England. And there was another guy who called
Because,
Cotton.
England's never had problems with smallpox.
No, no. She apparently survived smallpox, but she went from being quite beautiful to being disfigured because, as you can imagine, if you've got pustules all over your face and body and palms of your hands and the bottom of your feet,
The
um,
inside of your mouth.
in the inside of your mouth, you do end up being very, 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 very scarred from it. And so she went from being apparently quite a beautiful person to being pox scarred, or pockmarked, which is actually where the word comes from. Is pockmarked is from the diseases, from pox diseases. And anyway, she ended up bringing variolation into England and Europe when she found out about it from going to the Middle East. I think it was, yeah, the Middle East. I really and there was another person called Cotton Mather, who, if you are a witch, you might recognize that name because he was one of the big players in the Salem witch trials. He was also a slave owner. Yeah, but he
I
was
mean, if you were
told.
white and you had land back then and you lived in the South, you probably were.
Yeah, he was from Boston. Um, anyway,
Oof. That's a big oof.
yeah,
F in the chat for that, guys.
yeah, he also, so he was given by his congregation because he was a Puritan
Puritan.
Puritan priest. He So he was given a slave by his congregation, and he also went around and murdered innocent people for witchcraft. Nice fellow. But he was also a big proponent for variolation in America. So maybe that's no, he was terrible. He was a terrible human being. Um, and
Most of
so
them were back then.
yeah, yeah. However, the slave that told him about inoculation, variolation, um, was able to buy his freedom in 1716. So, yay, because owning a person is completely good.
That awkward moment when you have to literally pay to own yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool. Yes, and Akita makes a good point, and you wonder why I'm an tit heist.
And you wonder why I was an anti-theist.
I know, I call him anti heist because it looks like anti
Anti-heist.
anti heist.
Anti-heist.
um,
We need Akeda, we need a definition for anti-heist. This is a new Meroism.
yeah, anti heist. Anyway, so
Since when do ants have tits? Like last I checked, their larvae are fed through vomit. Topic for another video.
Another video. Yeah, no, it's a singular tit heist. Is stealing someone's tits. Anyway, so yeah, so he was one of the ones. And also the reason why he found out about it is that his slave Onseminus, what was it? On once I did ask you about that earlier. He told Cotton, because that's not a racist name at all, about his variolation, because slaves who had smallpox were worth more than ones that hadn't had smallpox. So he wanted to make sure that his slave was worth more. So that was nice. Yes.
Yay.
Yay.
This is a reminder that, like, everybody who over idealizes history, yeah, there was slavery in ancient times. You were going to die of a terrible disease because we had no idea how diseases worked. Like during the bubonic plague, which again, go check Marrow's video on that out while you wait for the one on smallpox that's coming that we're both like working on at the moment. So like you could die of a number of horrible virulent diseases. If smallpox didn't get you, measles would. If measles didn't get you and or paralyze you, because measles did that, then there was typhoid that could get you. And that, like, there was a lady who could just wander around and spread it. She had it. It never killed her. It didn't really hurt her, but everything she touched.
Yeah, I actually want to do a video on Mary Mellon, because she was so badly portrayed in history. I feel really sorry for her. She was in a situation where, she couldn't get financial support. She couldn't get a job because she was uneducated, and she was also a woman. She didn't understand, like, this was only a few years after, like, there were still some doctors during that time who didn't believe in germ theory. So
Well, I mean, germ theory wasn't even conceptualized yet.
yeah, I think it was a few years. It was only about 50 years beforehand that germ theory was actually talked about. But yeah, there were still some doctors who genuinely believed that germ theory wasn't a thing at that time.
Wasn't
she
this
was
like the height of humor theory still also?
No, not quite. They literally would just, because I looked into her a little bit, and because I've been thinking about doing a video on Mary Mellon, because the poor woman, she got slaughtered in history to being this, she was, deliberately doing it. And she was like, no, she was in a really rough situation and she wasn't sick. That's the thing. And she actually had an independent laboratory test her for typhoid, and they said that she didn't have it. So she just got treated really badly by history. So I kind of want to do a video on her just to say, hey, look, don't shit all over. And there was also Typhoid John as well. Like, there were about 3 or 4 different people who were also spreading typhoid around, who were asymptomatic carriers. And if it had been like, if she was able to get educated to get a job that didn't include cooking, but she wasn't able to because she was a woman and she was Scottish as well. So she had had a lot of she was in America and she was Scottish and she was uneducated, and it was her doing what she did was more because of the situation she was in. And eventually they ended up just putting her on an island with a dog because she had to she refused to accept that she was sick, which, I can kind of understand her point of view. So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, so question for the chat, by the way. Do you guys want us to cover more sort of unusual historical plagues and stuff like that? Because one of the reasons that this one fascinated me was because it caused the proliferation of Buddhism and like cemented Buddhism's power in Japan, which radically changed the way that like their culture functioned and continues to function to this day, to be honest. Like the echoes of smallpox, again, remember, it was eradicated in the 1980s. We've only been vaccinating it for how many years, Mero? Because I know that came up in your research.
Since Jenner started inoculating people against smallpox using the cowpox vaccina.
But I mean, like, when did I wonder when it reached like worldwide stuff? Because like that started in the States, didn't it?
I can't remember. I haven't got to that point in my script. But Jenner was the person who started. He took small cowpox. He took cowpox and injected it into a little good boy and waited a few weeks and then gave the kid smallpox because that's medical ethics didn't exist. Medical ethics didn't. Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, like birth control was developed by giving folks of color pills and seeing what happened. Like there's a lot of shitty stuff in history.
Yeah, and prisoners as well. Yeah, it's good fun.
And indigenous people, lots of indigenous people
were
given all kinds of experimental medications and told that it was something else. Let's see. Ikeda says maybe more than plagues, but yes, this is fascinating. Yeah, well, I mean, different historical stuff. It's just right now, Marrow's on a plague kick, and microbiology is just a fascination. And like, I can find all kinds of cool stuff about epidemiology. And like, there is a plague in South America that we're both trying to do some research on that they still don't even know what it was, and it still seems to recur, and we still haven't figured out what the heck the vector behind it is.
Yeah, you said they think it might be salmonella, wasn't it?
It might be a variant of salmonella that acts like hemorrhagic fever. And I'm still digging into the research papers on that. But like Marrow might put out a video on the disease itself, their theories around like the things that salmonella can do. And I'm still digging into everything I can find because this plague happened shortly after the colonization of parts of South America. It wiped out something close to like half the population, and the symptoms were horrific, and it was extraordinarily virulent. There are still echoes of it in cultures in South America to this day. It's nuts. But there's not a lot of resources that you can find on it. So I'm having to do the deep dig. I'm having to do the Googlist foo. So we're hoping that maybe not the next episode, but a few episodes down the line, we might get to talk about it. Though you were talking about wanting to do a video about salmonella soon. And like salmonella is one of those things. That's one of those diseases you'll run into as a modern person. Like,
yes, and you'll also run. You'll also run
out of both orifices, probably.
Yeah. It's definitely a run.
I got salmonella last year or the year before, like twice, from contaminated food that we didn't get warnings about either of them until like a month after I got it. One of it was from tahini and the other one was from like salad greens. So fun fact, guys, even if you're a vegetarian, you can still get exposed to that stuff if somebody decides that they feel like wiping their butt in the field. This is petition for better working conditions for farmers.
Yes.
And for like migrant workers. Everyone. Because migrant workers, people demonize migrant workers, but like the horrific like work conditions that they have is like very much responsible. And same with like meat packing plant conditions are very much responsible for a lot of the reason why food poisoning is such a big concern.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was actually salmonella was actually one of the first bioterrorism attacks in America. I think it was salmonella. There was
salmonella
there was a cult.
Yeah, anthrax.
There was a cult that there was a cult that spread salmonella to try and get everyone to accept them or something. I can't remember.
Are you talking about the
That'd
one
be
in
an interesting.
Oregon?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. There's an entire thing on Netflix on that particular cult. They put, if it was salmonella, they put something like some kind of food poisoning in the food for elected officials to try to kill elected officials that were going to vote against them getting to be their own city and like basically forcibly taking over a small town.
Mm. Um. Um.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you handle food, wash your damn hands and the food too. Fun fact: I worked in a deli and a fast food restaurant through college at the same time. I worked nights for one of them and overnights for the other. It's basically how I put myself through school, at least up until stuff happened and I couldn't finish. So that yeah, absolutely wash your hands. You'd be shocked at some of the stuff that people get away with in these places, as long as you're
Mm.
if you already had the inspection that month and people just kind of get lax. Yeah, be careful where you eat. Make sure you check that people are wearing gloves and that you can see them. And if you're handling your own food, even if it's at home, yes, wash your produce, wash your hands. Your produce, you don't know where it's been. You don't know what it was exposed to in the warehouse. You don't know like what it was exposed to when it was picked. You don't know what those bruises might have in there. There's all kinds of gross stuff that your food can be getting up to. Plus, it also actually preserves it for a little longer. If you dry it off properly, you might wash some fungal spores off of it, and then the native fungus in your house needs to find it first rather than just whatever it was carrying already.
Yes. Microbiology. Fascinating. Fascinating shit.
All right, so we're at the hour and a half mark. I think we're about at the point where we can wrap up. So, do you have any comments on like the way that kind of the course of the disease of smallpox seemed to have shaped Japan? Because like that's the thing that fascinated me the most is when you were researching how smallpox evolved. I'm like, it's 11 days and like this village is now petitioning to be skipped out the stuff. Then you talked about like the week and the 2 weeks or so of like
Yeah.
misery that you get before the pustules even start showing up. It's interesting to see how this stuff lines up and how things change because of
Yeah.
stuff like this.
Yeah. I didn't actually explain where they think smallpox evolved. There's hypotheses. One is that it sort of started in the Middle East or Africa, and it came from a camel pox type like ancestor, and basically it infected the camel pox and it infected camels, and then it spread to humans and rodents in Africa. That seems to be the leading hypothesis. Some people are actually saying it was a horsepox type virus as well,
And
and other
it
people.
wasn't the theory that like the specifics of the camel's immune system that having to deal with that is part of why smallpox ended up being able to infect humans?
Yeah, that's yeah, because it was able to jump zoonotically from whatever it was to camels. And so like with our most recent plague, what happened is it likely came from either a bat or a pangolin or something like that.
Oh,
And
pangolins are
it
so
jumped,
cute.
yeah, they are. And it jumped into humans. And the reason why we know this wasn't a lab leak thing, it wasn't made, but in a lab, is because the initial SARS-CoV-2, like the wild type SARS-CoV-2, was actually it spread amongst humans, but it wasn't very infectious compared to later variants of this of the disease. The wild type SARS-CoV-2 doesn't exist anymore because it was outcompeted by the other variants, because the other variants were a lot more infectious. Because and that kind of is what happened with smallpox, is it jumped into camels, and then it jumped into humans.
Because we were
um
easier to infect than the camels were.
well, no, because we were infectable, like we were able to be infected but it required the specialization of the species to be able to spread amongst humans. So the initial smallpox virus was probably not very, very infectious compared to the later stages of it. And that was because camels had something weird with their immune system, which allowed it to specialize into human, from camels into human. Because if you look at the dates when they did the genetic sequencing, they all camelpox, tetrapox, and smallpox viruses all kind of evolved at the same time.
Which is why that's one of the leading theories.
Yeah. So but there's also a theory because in the latest in India, when they sequenced the smallpox virus, there was a lot of genetic variation within India, but that was also explained that there was a lot of outbreaks in India. Um, and so therefore that's why you have got a lot of genetic variation. But if you look at the smallpox from West Nile, there was even more variation from between Western Africa, not West Nile, sorry, West Africa. They looked at the genetic variance between that and India, and they found that there was more. So they think it is likely it was West Africa where it started, but we don't know. We can't repeat history, as Ali said, so we don't really know. So
You get one shot.
you get one shot, and that was maybe 300 CE, maybe 600 BCE. We don't even know when it happened, but they think it was roughly around. It
There
was
are
a few
records.
hundred years either side.
Well, there were records that described something like smallpox that could have also been measles, and then there was another thing, like there were pox marks or like scar tissue on some mummies, like Egyptian mummies, that looked like they could have been smallpox, but there's also other things that they could have been, and the genetic material degraded at the point due to the mummification process so much that they
Yeah.
can't figure it out.
Yeah, and I'm a very big fan of them never trying to be able to culture smallpox. Also, highly horrifying thought is that because it's a DNA virus, and DNA is actually really, really stable, and especially since it's a double-stranded DNA virus, there are people in the permafrost that have been buried who died of smallpox, and because of climate change, that permafrost is melting. And on that happy note, I think that's probably us.
So like my final comment is just it's really fascinating how events like this can both shape religion and also how religion can be used like both for comfort but also to help bring stability. Like it shows the positive side of religious belief, I think, because again, like Japan was partially restabilized in part due to the principles of Buddhism being applied on such a wide scale that folks started to work together significantly more because they were incentivized for it.
Mm.
And like the syncretism of Buddhism and Shinto also shows yet again, syncretism's the most pagan thing there is. Like it humans that are not like hyper monotheists, that are not like hyper, I guess, even like orthodoxic, are far more likely to like in exchange between traditions. And so you see some really fascinating cultural shifts and art and other things that are born out of tragedy. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about studying history. On
Yeah.
that note, we haven't officially decided our topic. However, to give you guys a sneak peek, one of the ones we had talked about was potentially talking about how the bubonic plague actually hit Europe a lot earlier than you think it did. There were plagues in Greek and Rome,
Yeah.
potentially the same strain. We might talk about that. That's one of the things that are on the table.
And if you do have any suggestions for us, because we don't really want to turn this into a history and disease podcast, even though I would not say no to that because diseases fascinating.
I mean, let's face this is whatever we feel like talking about. So if you
Yeah,
catch our
basically.
interest,
Yeah. So so if anybody's got an idea of something that we could talk about, we can do that.
let
And
us know down in the comments or in the
yeah,
video discussion section on my Discord.
or I don't know, yell at us somehow. Smoke signals, flashing, mirror flashing at us. You
I'm
can't
not
do it
sure
to
how the
me. I
smoke
don't
signals are
exist.
going to reach your dimension, though.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I don't know. Morse code. I
That
don't know.
might that might
That
transmit through the
that
interwebs.
might yeah, that might work. So let us know. We're uh Discord for both of us. I'm much easier to find on Discord and Twitter because I refuse to name it that other word. Oh, yep. Singham says carrier pigeon. If I had a carrier pigeon sent to me, I would be so happy. So
They'd have to get through the dimensional rift.
yes, god damn it.
And you have to bring back carrier pigeons.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can send a carrier kangaroo.
I mean, if it doesn't punch you in the face or kick you in the face.
Yeah, no, they don't tend to punch. They tend to kick.
Or get killed by a redback.
Oh no, they're not too bad. Unless you want a red belly. They're not too bad either. Anyway.
By Australian standards.
By Australian standards.
Y'all have a completely different set of standards than the rest of us do. All right, so we are rambling off into the abyss. So before we end up breaking the dimensional rift that is currently anchoring Marrow with us, have a good night, everybody. Remember that we are all stronger together. Remember that allyship is essential for continuing to make change in the world. And I hope you all have a wonderful, whatever heretical time zone you're in. Have a good one, guys.
Bye.